Thomas and Victoria. Dear friends, here are 4 new adventures from Thomas's branch line. In them you will meet up again with several old friends, including, of course, Thomas himself. Oh, and there is a new friend for you called Victoria. We all hope you will like her as much as we do. The author, Wilbert Awdry. Overloaded. Toby was worried. So many workmen were needed at the quarry that Henrietta wasn't able to carry them all. Bertie did his best to help, but he couldn't get closer than the quarry gate. We need another coach to take the men inside, Toby complained. One morning, Bertie didn't feel well, and Henrietta was all on her own. More and more workmen climbed into her. "Help!" Henrietta exclaimed. "I shan't be able to move." "We can't either," grumbled the workmen. "We're too squashed together." Henrietta had a balcony at each end, and soon even these were packed. She was fuller than ever before. Toby had a hard time starting. Come on, come on, come on, come on! Toby fussed impatiently, his wheels slipping on the damp rails. People in the street stared as the train struggled past. Toby rang his bell cheerfully, but Henrietta wasn't so happy. Suddenly a car came out of a side street in front of them. Toby's driver put on the brakes at once. The train stopped quickly, and some of the workmen were pushed against the railing on Henrietta's front balcony. It bent, but luckily didn't break. A policeman passing on a bicycle stopped and wrote something in his notebook. "Oh dear," Henrietta said to herself. "That means trouble, I think." She was right. The next day an inspector came to see the quarry manager. "There is a bylaw, sir," he said, "which says that passengers should not be carried on open balconies of railway carriages." "I'm sorry, Inspector," the manager said. "It doesn't usually happen, but the bus couldn't run today." "Please make sure it doesn't happen again," said the inspector sternly. The quarry manager telephoned the Fat Controller to see if he could help. The Fat Controller wasn't hopeful, and the quarry manager went home to tea, shaking his head sadly. A few days later, Thomas stopped at the station by the river. As they waited, they heard a buzzing noise from behind a hedge near the platform. Suddenly, there was a rustling and a loud crash. A man's head appeared above the hedge. He had a saw in his hands. "It's nice to see the railway once more," he said cheerfully. "It's been like a jungle in there." Later, Thomas stopped there again. "Hello," said a shaky voice. Thomas was puzzled, but his driver had heard it too. He looked over the edge and saw a very old, very broken down railway coach. "What's your name?" asked the driver. "Victoria," replied the coach shyly. "Are you Thomas's driver?" But before he could answer, the guard's whistle blew and they had to go. At the top station, Toby told Thomas about the workmen. "I really need another coach," he said sadly. "But we've just found one," said Thomas excitedly. "She's in an orchard near the river, and she's old and lonely." "She's got no wheels and her roof leaks like a sieve," interrupted Thomas's driver. "Don't even think about it." Thomas did think about it and asked the Fat Controller. The Fat Controller listened, made some arrangements, and then telephoned the quarry manager. "Good morning, Toby and Henrietta," the manager greeted them the next morning. "It's going to be all right," he went on. "The Fat Controller says don't worry about another coach, because he has something up his sleeve." Avalanche. The Fat Controller had left Boko in charge of the branch line while Edward went into the works to be mended. Edward needed to be fit before the summer visitors came. After a week, he was growing bored, but then a newcomer arrived. She was a wooden coach, and Edward thought there was something familiar about her. That evening, he heard a quiet, timid voice. "Excuse me," it said. "You're Edward, aren't you?" "That's right," he smiled. "Haven't I seen you somewhere before?" "Perhaps," replied the coach. "There were lots of us built for the furnace railway. That's your old line, so says Thomas's driver." "That's right," smiled Edward. "What's your name?" "Victoria," said the coach. "When I was too old to work, I was made into a summer house in an orchard. Now a kind gentleman with a top hat says I can be mended and work on the railway again." "That would be the Fat Controller," said Edward. "Did he say where you would work? There'd be plenty for you to do on my line," continued Edward hopefully. Victoria hesitated. "I think the Fat Controller knew," she said, "but he didn't say." "Where did you work in the old days?" asked Edward. "My friend Helena and I worked on a branch line to a station called Lakeside," Victoria said. "There was a big lake with steamers on it. Windmere was called. Albert was our engine. He was old but very gentlemanly and polite." She broke off, chuckling. "Except once," Victoria explained. "It was winter and very cold. Even the lake was beginning to freeze over, and that didn't often happen." "I don't suppose you had many passengers off the steamer then," put in Edward. "You'd be surprised," Victoria said. "For some it was the easiest way of getting from the town to the other side of the lake. Anyhow, on this winter's day, the snow wasn't too bad at the junction, so we were all right when we set out. As we got near the hills, the snow got thicker. We reached a place called Haverwaite, where there were 2 tunnels, one at each end of the station. Albert didn't care about a bit of snow. Silly soft stuff, he called it." "Thomas used to say that too," smiled Edward. "The steamer was late that day. Ice in the water, they said, and that made us late too. Albert was hurrying because when people got off the steamer, they had to catch other trains at our junction." Victoria paused. She chuckled to herself before she went on. "Albert had been boasting about how good he was with the snow. Well, we soon got back to Haverwaite, and Albert stopped with his buffers at the mouth of the tunnel. The guard's whistle sounded. Albert didn't waste any time. He set off with a tremendous blast of steam, but the steam blew off an enormous lump of snow off the tunnel mouth. It poured down with a loud whoosh in his cab. Albert's driver quickly put on the brakes. The train stopped, and then a lot more snow came down on Helena and me. She was almost completely buried, and half of me was too. Albert couldn't move an inch. He wanted to, but he didn't dare in case he brought down more snow. The passengers weren't hurt, but it was next morning before the men dug us out. I've never been so cold. Albert never boasted about snow again, though." "I wonder why," chuckled Edward. Eels on Wheels. The work needed to make Victoria as good as new took a long time. Summer came with a long, hot, dry spell and no rain. The sun shone from a clear blue sky, and the engines grew hotter and hotter. Sometimes Daisy noticed creatures coiled up beside the railway enjoying the sunshine. Usually they took no notice as they passed, but now and then they would slither away to hide beneath the dry grass. "How do they move?" wondered Daisy. "They've got no legs." "Neither of you," laughed the driver, "but you'll manage all right. They're grass snakes and they move by wriggling their bodies." "How clever," thought Daisy, and she told Thomas and Percy about it. Percy shuddered. "I don't like the sound of that," he said. "I hope they don't come near me." "They won't," his driver reassured him. "They're harmless and much more frightened of you than you are of them." "I'm not scared, Percy," said Daisy scornfully. "You're not frightened of a few harmless wriggly things, surely." Percy wasn't comforted. He said, "Just the thought of them makes me shiver." Daisy thought he was being very silly. One afternoon, she brought some boxes up from the junction. The men handled them very carefully. "It's a special delivery," explained Daisy's driver. "What's so special about it?" asked Daisy. "It contains live eels," her driver said. "Sort of water snakes. They're for a special menu at the restaurant in the high street." Very carefully, the porter stacked the boxes on the platform. Daisy moved back so that the milk van could be coupled to her. Porters began to load empty milk churns into her van. A pile of boxes was now just in front of her. Suddenly, a small boy ran past. He accidentally caught the top box of the pile with his coat sleeve. It hit the platform and burst open onto the rails in front of Daisy. Out cascaded a knot of slithery black eels, which at once tried to wriggle away. "Aah!" she squealed. "Help!" A porter ran to see what was the matter. He found Daisy pulling a face of such disgust that he couldn't help laughing. "Get me out of here!" wailed Daisy. "Stop making such a fuss," ordered her driver. "They're only eels. They're not going to hurt you. You've blown a fuse anyway." In no time, all the eels had been rescued and put into another box, none the worse for their adventure. A porter took them well out of harm's way. Daisy couldn't bear to watch. A fitter came and tried to mend her, but she was in such a state of nerves that it was no use. Thomas had to take her passengers back to the junction. That night, Percy and Toby made up lots of what they called wriggly jokes, which Daisy thought they were very silly. "Never mind," said Toby. "Near my old railway there's a place called Ely. Think of that." Daisy shuddered. It was the last thing she wanted to think about. Toby's vintage train. At last Victoria was ready. The fat controller came to see her. "I want you to go to Thomas's junction with Edward," he said. "Thomas will take you to meet Toby and Henrietta, and I want you to work with them." Victoria's wheels hummed happily on the rails. "It's wonderful to be running again," she thought. Edward introduced her to Boko at his station, and soon they reached Thomas's junction. Thomas and the fat controller were waiting for them. Thomas's driver was amazed at the changes in Victoria. I hope you feel better, the Fat Controller said to her. You certainly look better than when we first saw you. I feel wonderful, thank you, sir, smiled Victoria. Victoria was coupled behind Annie and Clarabelle, and they set off up the valley. At the station by the river, an inspector met them. Terrence is in trouble, he said. I'll ride in your cab, Thomas, but go careful until we know what has happened. A little way along the line, Terrence's owner was building a barn. The lane to the barn ran along the top of a cutting just outside the tunnel. That afternoon, Terrence had been pulling a trailer loaded with stones for the barn when a boulder had fallen into the lane from the verge. Terrence swerved towards the edge of the cutting to avoid the boulder, and of course the trailer followed. Suddenly, the trailer's wheels hit a muddy patch and slipped sideways towards the railway. The weight of the stone dragged the trailer further over the edge. Terrence tried to hang on, but the trailer broke away and bumped down the steep hill towards the railway. Luckily, there was a large bush on the cutting side. The trailer ran into it and stopped, bouncing dangerously. The heavy stone tumbled down the slope and landed beside the railway with a crash. Thomas's train is due, gasped Terrence. His owner rang to telephone a warning to the station. His call was just in time. With the inspector in his cab, Thomas moved cautiously along the line. By the time they reached the place of the accident, the farmer had managed to fasten the trailer so that it would not move. The inspector made sure that the building stones had not damaged the railway. All right, he told Thomas's driver as he climbed back into the cab. Proceed with caution, please, and drop me at the next signal box so that I can report what has happened. Thomas and the inspector reached the top station safely and found Toby and Henrietta waiting for them. Victoria and Henrietta liked each other at once and soon became the best of friends. There cannot be many railways, announced the Fat Controller, who can run a complete train of stock as old as Toby, Henrietta, and Victoria. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you 3 cheers for Toby's vintage train. I am very proud of all 3 of you, and I know you will be a credit to me. Now Victoria is as happy as can be. She helps Henrietta to take the workmen to and from the quarry, and at other times you will see her with Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle running happily along the valley. She knows she's very lucky. This is much better than being a summer house in an orchard, she sometimes thinks to herself. It's great to be useful again. I think we can be sure, can we, that Victoria will be useful for many years to come.